Welcome to Crossing Faiths. I'm John Pinna, and today we have Ms. Rushan Abbas, who is a advocate for the Uyghur community and a founder of the Campaign for Uyghurs, as well as since the mid 80s been advocating for the Uyghur community globally through a number of institutions. Welcome.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you and also tell the story of my people here. Thank you.
No, I appreciate you taking the time. So, I mean, maybe let's just step into who are the Uyghurs? Some of our listeners know, some of them don't know. We've heard the name. Who are the Uyghurs, and you know, where are they from? Where do they reside, and where do they fit in the pantheon of faith communities?
Yeah, Uyghurs actually lived in Central Asia for a long time, for centuries, and we are predominantly Muslim and belong to a Turkic ethnic group, which is very close with ethnically and linguistically and historically. We are very close with Turkish people in Turkey and the Uzbeks and Kazakh and Turkmenis, all these Turkic ethnicities there.
Yeah, the pan-Turkic people, which starts in Turkey and has this swath that goes to Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, or Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and stuff. So yeah,
absolutely
into China. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, now it's occupied by China. They gave us new name in the late 1800s, Xinjiang, which means new territory. And we called East Turkestan because geographically, historically, and symbolically, we like to use that because we resent the name Xinjiang, because we are not new territory or new border for anybody in our mind.
Right, like the one China concept that has affected you dramatically, right? The idea of this incorporation and expansion of this identity of China. So, and you're ethnically different, and linguistically different, and religiously different.
Absolutely.
It's not easy once borders are formed, and then on top of that, there's policy to institute change. And so, around what time did? So we had the Cultural Revolution, right? And so in China, and so like when was the Uyghur people existing sort of semi-independent or autonomous up to what time?
Actually, we have been occupied by Manchurian dynasty since late 1800s, when British financed the Manchurians to take over our homeland, when Tsar Russia was expanding all the way to Central Asian countries, and the British didn't want Russia to get to our land, so they gave money and financed China to come and take over. But we established our own independent country twice, short-lived East Turkestan. First time was 1933, second time was 1944. But then in 1949, when Communist China came over with establishment of People's Republic of China with communist government, we have been occupied by the new Chinese communist regime ever since. And they give us, in the name only, autonomous rights. They called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And still, actually, technically, that word exists, but in reality, there's no any autonomy, any kind of rights in anywhere, because of our cultural, ethnical, linguistic, and the religious background. The Chinese government is conducting full-fledged active genocide in the last more than 10 years.
Wow, that's I think it's very similar, the parallel with 1949 with the Tibetan community. I know I've done some advocacy with the Tibetan community and worked with His Holiness and the Tibetan government in exile. And 49 was the invasion, right? They came into the Tibetan plateau, and even though it's autonomous, there's been a number of incursions of settlers There's been language change and so forth. So in 49, the same thing happened to your community. And so it
Yes.
brought in settlers and brought in language and schools and so forth. And that all started after the sort of incursion in 49, correct?
Absolutely. Yes, that's what happened. And ever since the occupation, actually, they started to target our elites, thought leaders, and the people who can lead the community. During the 50s, the Uyghurs were targeted in the name of nationalists, and they persecuted and they executed thousands of people then. And then during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, Uyghurs were labeled under the pretext of counter-revolutionists.
Sure.
And they were being targeted and again, persecuted heavily, which is the time of my grandpa and my parents. I was born in 1967, right in the middle of the Cultural Revolution. And my grandpa was in jail, faced all kind of physical torture. And my parents, being elites, my father was a scientist who effectively used his position to help the Uyghur people. And my mother was a my mother was a physician, medical doctor. And she witnessed the devastating health consequences of China's nuclear tests in Loknor, starting from mid-60s. So my early childhood or baby stories all linked to persecution of my family, or the stories of my grandpa, what he faced in jail, and how my mom and dad were always taken away for re-education centers. So yeah, from a very young age, I started to learn that Uyghurs are being mistreated by this government.
How has that changed? As from your growing up, they have re-education centers, and so it's ramped up to what it is now. And maybe just talk a little bit about the identity of persecution and how it's evolved, because I think a lot of people will hear re-education centers and they kind of understand what that is. But and we've heard a lot of rumors. There's and there's been news reports about medical testing, harvesting of organs, and so forth. And maybe it's, you just unpack the evolution and sophistication of how this has evolved from when you were younger, when you were a young child, up to now, because it's evolved quite substantially. Correct?
Yes, actually, after the end of the Cultural Revolution in 1976, and then establishment of the diplomatic relations with People's Republic of China and the United States in 1979, and also with Soviet invasion in Afghanistan, and so much happened at that time. About 10 years from 1979 to 1989, we had some freedom, a little bit of freedom, and lots of the historical Uyghur books were being published at that time. And we were able to organize some protests against the Chinese Communist Party. Actually, that's where I started my first activism. In 1985, I was one of the co-organizers of the student protest in December 12, 1985. So this December, we will be commemorizing the 40 years anniversary of that protest. And we were able to mobilize more than 20,000 Uyghur students. We were protesting against the Chinese government's birth control policies against my people, and the nuclear testings in our region, and the bringing Chinese criminals to our region, building a jail, and using it as like a dumping ground. But those prisoners were breaking the prisons and the coming out and the killing innocent people, all kind of crime rate really went up. And also heavy discrimination for the Uyghur university students. When we graduate, we don't get good jobs. We are always being treated as a secondary citizens in our homeland. Then I left my homeland in 1989, just a few weeks before the Tiananmen Square massacre. And basically, Tiananmen Square massacre ended any freedom that we had. And the harsh policy started. But like each time when something happens in the international community, the Chinese government used very effectively to step up their persecution against Uyghurs. For example, right after the Soviet collapsed down and the establishment of the stands in Central Asia, independent Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan, all of a sudden the Uyghurs became separatists. The Chinese government started to persecute Uyghurs under the pretext of separatists. And then when the 9/11 tragedy happened in the United States, in overnight, the Uyghurs became terrorists because China saw the opportunity to use the war on terror to get rid of the Uyghurs. Actually, what's really hypocritic at that time, what Chinese government did is, in August that summer, we saw a lot of propaganda videos showing up. Chinese government was trying to get the Western businesses to East Turkestan because they were trying hard to get into the World Trade Organization. So they were producing all kinds of videos showing beautiful landscape of our homeland and saying that beautiful place with friendly, peaceful Uyghur people, come and invest. Your investments are safe and you will make a lot of money. And then just a few weeks later, when 9/11 happened, they turned around and they said, oh, Uyghurs are terrorists and we are being victim of the terrorism. And then, so let's move fast forward to Xi Jinping. So Xi Jinping was elected in 2012. And then in Astana, Kazakhstan, he announced the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. And Belt and Road Initiative is Xi Jinping's blueprint for the global domination, dominating both sea routes and the ancient Silk Road from where our homeland sits on. And Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative put our homeland in the epicenter of his blueprint for the global domination, because we are gateway to Central Asia, to Europe and the Middle East.
The overland route. It's the overland route, which is essentially establishing the Silk Road. And with the Pakistanis, they have CPEC, and that goes all the way through. So the idea of developing roads and rail and so forth overland to reestablish the Silk Road. But I don't know if that's a pejorative term. I have no idea. But the idea of reestablishing overland trade in those regions, and you're right there in the western part of China, in the Tarim Basin there, right? So you guys are really stuck as sort of being the epicenter of this initiative.
Right, exactly.
But you don't own it. You don't have any stake in it. It's the Chinese government's agenda, and it's your land. But the people need to be are not. They have no agency in the entire enterprise.
Right, and also with that, one of the Chinese official, Hu Lianghe, actually said, "This is the time to take Uyghur issue to the final solution stage, basically eliminating the people, getting rid of the people, and vacate the land for the Belt and Road Initiative." And with that, first concentration camp, Chinese government calls it re-education camps, but we call it concentration camps because when you describe the situation, nothing different than what you saw during the World War II. So
let's maybe just take a moment there, and and if it's okay to talk about when it comes to a re-education camp. So you're at home, and anytime they can come and take you.
Yes,
and then they process you, bring you into the camp, and then what are the is it work, is it medical, is it what happens with people once they get to the camp?
Basically, hold on, let me just turn off the audio for a second. So the camps, they targeted the most of the religious leaders, educators, thought leaders, famous professors, and the university presidents, graduate students, and anyone who ever educated in the West. And they brought all these people into those camps in the name of re-education, but in reality, they are subject to mental and physical torture and poor hygiene, overcrowded rooms. They put 100 people in the one large room. They cannot even sit comfortably without touching each other. And they spend 24/7 there. They sleep there. They take turn to lay down and sleep at nights. The malnutrition, they don't give enough food for these people, and that they don't allow them to use the bathroom facilities as needed. So how long a person's body can tolerate for something like that when you don't drink enough water, when you don't get enough food, and you are constantly subject to torture, mental and physical, and you are being tested like guinea pigs, giving you unknown medications daily. So people start to disappear. And the most warning sign there was crematoriums being built next to those camps for a religion or a group of people who doesn't practice cremation. We are Muslim. We bury bodies, not cremate. And another warning signs were the mass detention of over 1 million people started in April 2017. But end of 2016, we heard that the Chinese government was mandatorily collecting every Uyghur person's DNA samples. And the Uyghurs were subject to mandatory health check. With this, they've got everyone's blood and the DNA samples. So those Uyghurs were being used there for forced organ harvesting. And when the Chinese government say they are re-educating the Uyghur people who were being extremists or radicalized people, let me give you a few examples.
And I appreciate you talking about this. It means a lot for not only me, but our listenership, because the challenge is that we say detention camps, we say re-education, and a lot of times that term is used, but people don't really know. And it's so important, if you're okay with it, to spend some time on this, because I don't think people might hear things, but they don't hear it straight from the source, which is you. But they also hear these terms, and everybody, I think a lot of people just assume what it means, and so it makes a difference for our listenership, and for just the idea of speaking about the struggle your people are dealing with, for them to know really what's the scope and what's happening. And so I appreciate you taking the time. It means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really devastating when you think about, what the people were subject to in the 21st century in those camps. According to former, camp victims who actually went through a re-education, or who taught at the as one of these re-education centers. And also, according to the Chinese government's own leaked documents and the Xi Jinping's personal directives to show absolutely no mercy, and they describe those camps as the most horrific jail, actually worse than jail. And the party secretary, the Chinese party secretary at that time, and he said, this is actually a direct quote from him about those camps. He said, teach like a school, be managed like the military, and be defended like a prison. And, which they did. They absolutely did that, basically. It was called schools, but it was like a prison and the concentration camps, basically. Xinjiang police files, another latest leak, has thousands of images of those detained Uyghurs, actually, on the internal police documents and speeches by the top officials. If you look at them, it's horrific conditions and situation there. And also, the Uyghurs are being used as slaves, for forced labor. So basically, as I always say, with those Uyghur genocide, with those concentration camps, the Chinese government is making profit of this genocide, basically making this genocide a profitable venture.
Because they're building either products or hydroelectric power, civil works projects, and stuff like that. And so it ends up translating into revenue for the government or benefiting some industry somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they are doing. And the Chinese government is actually deliberately made everything that people use in the Western world, including the United States. For example, if you have purchased a vehicle in the last 5-10 years, some part of your car, for sure, either your windshield, or your upholstery, or your tires, or some part of your vehicle is used manufactured by Uyghur slaves' blood, sweat, and tears. So basically, when you use Zara bags, or when you use, cotton from China, or any made in China products, basically, you are being complicit with this genocide. Not just complicit, you are being the enabler of this genocide, while we use those goods manufactured by those supply chains using Uyghurs as forced laborers.
I know.
And also,
no, I said I know. I spoke with I did an interview with Congressman Frank Wolf, and one of his big agenda items is to stop buying products from China, and trying to implement that on the Hill, which hasn't happened, obviously. And so it's so difficult because it's easy to suspend your human rights advocacy because you're surrounded by all the things you want and you want to purchase them and so forth. And so, I mean, a lot of people make purchases through TikTok, and TikTok is China, right? So, let's not talk about other. I know they were recently purchased, but so the challenge is like it's such a bulwark, right? So you have China's just massive. It's integrated into the global economy. Its economy itself is massive. How do you fight these? What are the tools you're using right now, and are they effective? I know you just had an event on the Hill a few days ago, and what was the ask? What's the, what are the things that you're actionable items that you're asking people to get involved in, and what you're using as a community?
Yeah, before I answer that question, I just want to stop a little more about what's happening back home. Sure. Because I want to touch a little bit about what the Uyghur women are facing as a woman myself.
Absolutely.
Uyghur girls are forced to marry Han Chinese men, and Chinese government is actually like incentivizing those forced marriages to the Han Chinese men. If they come and they marry to Uyghur girl, they get money, housing, and the jobs. But that Uyghur girl, for whatever reason, if she's not ready to get married, or she doesn't want to marry to this particular person, if she says no for such a forced marriage, her family, her siblings, her parents, herself, everyone will send to those so-called re-education centers in the name of radicalized Muslim did not want to marry non-Muslim Han Chinese. I call this mass rape of the Uyghur women in the name of sham marriages. And also, this is not something that I am saying, but the Chinese state media reported 1.1 million Han Chinese men sent to Uyghur homes to live inside of Uyghurs' homes and they supervise and they monitor the Uyghurs' daily lives. Most of the Uyghur men are taken to the camps or forced labor facilities or prisons. The women left at home, your sisters, your mothers, your daughters, they're subject to sexual abuse inside of their own homes. So I call this the Uyghur women's bodies are the battleground of this genocide because of the forced sterilization that they are subject to, forced abortions, forced marriages. Uyghur birth rate dropped down to 0% today in some of the Uyghurs' most populated areas. The Chinese government is not hiding this. Chinese embassy in the United States publicly celebrated those genocidal efforts by tweeting and saying the Uyghur women are no longer baby-making machines. This is the reality. But where are the so-called feminists and the people who's supposed to speak out for any kind of social injustice? Where are the Hollywood celebrities who are so active to take any cause and to defend people? It just frustrates me when I see that everyone is willing to speak when there's no consequences. But to speak out against the CCP, yes, there are consequences. But then again, what's the cost of the free world that everyone worked so hard to establish the last 60, 70 years in the West? Because this is not just about the Uyghurs anymore. What's happening to Uyghur people is not staying within China's borders. What Chinese government is doing today to the world by silencing people like myself, I actually came to the United States in 1989. I have been a US citizen since 1995. Yet my freedom of speech in the United States as an Uyghur American cost my own sister's freedom. I participated on a public panel at Hudson Institute in September 2018. 5 days later, they took my sister in Urumqi, the capital city. And ever since, she's in jail right now, paying the price for my activism or my freedom of speech in the United States as an American citizen. So that's why I doubled down my efforts. I quit my full-time job and I became a full-time activist now because I realized the oppression or silencing or the dictatorship regime that I escaped once from China followed me here. I left when I was 21 years old because I was looking for something that we did not have, which is the respect for human dignity and the freedom and the democracy, which I love. But now that's being at stake. The future of the free world is being at stake. Unless if we speak out today, then the only voice left will be one of regret. That's why we have to act. And that's why I am actually, no matter what is the, situation, we
Consequence.
have to, yeah, consequences, or even if we face, not so much of a movement, or even we don't get a lot of support, I have to continuously speaking out, and try to turn the awareness into action. Now, let me answer your question. So we have been working hard, and we did achieve some, like we did actually saw some achievement. Hold on, let me scratch that. Through a lot of Uyghur organizations and advocates working hard, and they having a bipartisan support from both Republicans and the Democrats, we were able to pass two legislations. One is the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, and the other one is Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which is being impactful. We have like dozens of companies on the sanction list, and we are stopping a lot of goods at the border, unable to make it here. But there are some like faults in this bill, like de minimis clause. So instead of shipping with one large shipment, the goods coming from China, they are making it in a small shipments to just use that. But we have to continue, as you know, we need to educate and mobilize people and share the truth about what's happening to Uyghur people, because all the dictators, they're afraid of the truth. So we have to keep, educating people in the classrooms and workplaces and houses and worship places, interface, communities and online. And also China invests enormous resources to bury the truth under their propaganda. And every conversation is important because it start to help expose the reality. And we need to demand accountability from the governments and the institutions, and the pressure our elected officials to pass and enforce some of the laws that we have right now. And United Nations mechanisms, actually, United Nations, it became useless because the Chinese government is very effectively manipulating the United Nations. But we have to, continuously try to expose the Chinese government in those different, platforms and the institutions.
It was a friend of mine was just saying recently, and so I deal with the UN quite a bit, and they're saying China, it's not America that's the center, it's China that's the center of the UN, and a lot of people don't realize that is the case now. And, it's that China is really front and center and really able to swim in those waters very effectively. It's essentially, if all the member states, and each member state has the thing that's sexy to them, that they deal with. So, I was just talking about the special rapporteur for religious freedom, and talking about how the appointment process works, and it's the countries that find that position important, and there's like four. One is the UK, one is Morocco, and so those four countries, basically, because they donate to that directorate, they have a say. And so but China, because of its power in engaging all the member states and member communities, plus the funding that it has, it can fund the different directorates, and then it has a lot of juice in those halls. One of the things that I wanted to kind of take a step back and talk about is that you're talking about the advocacy groups for specific things, like you say, where the feminists. There's also genocide organizations that this is something that I always am struggling with in my organization, because people say, why don't you advocate on this, or why don't you advocate on that? And I go, well, there's a whole bunch of organizations that we focus on the Iman message. And then through the Iman message, we get to dignity, and then we get to like religious freedom, or we get to genocide, or we get to those things. But it's not our direct course, right? Because we're not a genocide organization, and we're not. We deal with women's rights, but we're not a women's organization. And so the challenge is that there's a lot of healthy, well-funded organizations that deal with women's rights. that deal with genocide, that deal with, and I understand there's the idea that they have to prioritize, and there's a lot of events. But the challenge is that here's something that's happening that's documented. That the pictures are geotagged, and you have reports. The Chinese government is even celebrating it, and you would think that there would be a concerted effort that to address the issue collectively. Kind of like Me Too. And Black Lives Matter or whatever, and focus in that direction. And the challenge is that it's so diffuse. A lot of organizations will write a report and then they'll say, well, we wrote a report and we're against the Uyghur genocide, but we have the information here, but there's no mobilization. How is it, you got these resolutions, right? You pass these laws. Do you share that frustration with that these organizations are kind of, they're gatekeepers on what is or isn't genocide and what is important as far as genocide or feminism or something? It must be
frustrating. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more on what you said about the UN. China is acting like UN. It's a playground. Well, we do feel frustrated with some of the organizations and UN. UN Human Rights Council. They have the UN report, Human Rights High Commissioner's report on the Uyghurs. And they listed everything I said. They listed forced sterilizations. They listed the forced labor. They listed the children abduction, transferring the Uyghur children from their families. And they documented all this, including torture, all that. And yet, after they released the report, they couldn't even have a discussion about their own report, have a vote about having a discussion, and that didn't pass. So it is important to build the solidarity from different groups, and the struggle of the Uyghur people is a part of a larger fight against authoritarianism and the digital tyranny and the erosion of human rights around the world. So when people everywhere understand that their freedom is connected to ours, and that what's happening to Uyghurs today could happen to them tomorrow, action becomes inevitable. Just 2 days ago, we had this big conference with all interfaith groups that are being subject to the Chinese government's persecution. So we have people from Tibet and of course, Uyghurs and Southern Mongolians and the Hong Kong, and as well as Falun practitioners and the Chinese Christians. So it is important for all the marginalized groups to work together. Because to me, when we all shout together, our voice will be louder.
Right. And collectively, if it has to do with something with China, it helps. Yeah. But even still, persecuted peoples in the sub-Saharan Africa, still deal with the UN mechanisms and still dealing with the same NGOs and organizations. You still want to talk to Europe and Russia and have that collective will. It's difficult. So the event the event that you're referring to, how is that mobilization happening, and is it being effective for your community?
Mm-hmm. It is actually it is being effective because a few years ago, let me just give you 2 examples from 5 years ago and now. 2020, Secretary Rubio, when he was a senator, he hosted me for State of the Union, and when we had the pre-party before we went to the chamber, when Rubio introduced me to people, and even the representatives or their chief of staffs or anybody, when I said Uyghur, excuse me.
That's okay.
When I said I am Uyghur, I had to explain to them who the Uyghurs are.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people did not know anything about Uyghurs. But Then 3 years later, when ranking member of select committee on the CCP, ranking member Krishnamurthy, when he hosted me for State of the Union, and also last year, Congressman Chris Smith hosted me for State of the Union. Those 2 times, I did not have to say anything. When ranking member Krishnamurthy or Congressman Chris Smith, when they introduced me, they said, Rushan Abbas is a Uyghur. Everyone, 100%, all of them were like, I'm so sorry for what's happening to your people. So these are all through our continuous advocacy, and as well as the organizations and the advocates continuously working at the Hill with different entities and different groups. So it's extremely important, and we do have like more than a dozen English books written by the Uyghur advocates or Uyghur former camp victims, and that's really telling the story globally. So we are trying what we can, and we are seeing some impacts of our advocacy.
It's not easy. It's like when like I said, we started this off the conversation with, all right, who are the Uyghur people? What's going on? Something that I've been working on somewhat tangentially now, but when I was at the American Islamic Congress, and then of course the Tibetan community. But the challenge is it's really, really difficult because it's China and it's so far away. It's inland. So if we're going to put items in the show notes, but if you're speaking to the Beltway, you're speaking to our audience, what are the ways in which, the tangible ways that can affect your community in a positive way, that you can note right now? Because I know we're coming to, you have a meeting right after this, so I want to make sure that people know how to act, how to help, how to support, advocating or in a small way or a big way, advocating for the Uyghur people and to help your people survive and flourish. So what are the elements that you can share with us?
Well, listen and act, listen to our stories, then amplify our voices, and share what you learn to the people around you or your community members, or on social media, so the truth cannot be buried under the CCP's false propaganda. And to support our work, support Uyghur organizations. I did Campaign for Uyghurs. You can go to our website, campaignforuyghurs.org, and donate whatever you can so we can continue our work. And also push your governments to act. Push your representatives, your elected officials to act and use your voice, and also use your purchasing power to make a difference. As I said, let's not make the Chinese government turn this genocide a profitable venture for them. If you are in the media or education, use your platforms to tell our stories, host events. If you have any impact, if you have any connections to universities or interfaith communities or anywhere, there is a documentary called In Search of My Sister. That documentary followed my advocacy, me and my husband's family stories, but yet that is, it tells everything about who the Uyghurs are, their history, their struggle, their resilience, and their political situation and everything. It tells the truth. And also I have a book on Amazon. The book is Unbroken, One Uyghur's Fight for Freedom. So you can purchase the book and read and educate yourself. And also you can have book discussions with me. I am actually getting contacted by libraries and the bookstores in Washington to schedule a book discussion event. So whatever you can, there's no too little. And we are grateful for anything that anybody can support and do. And we are actually very lucky to have a bipartisan support from the Congress. We have a Congressional Uyghur Caucus established by two wonderful congressmen, Congressman Smith and Congressman Swazi, and they are the founding members and the co-chairs, and ask your elected officials to join the caucus. It's important to understand that this is not a political issue. This is a humanity issue. And they advocate for critical policies, like there are a few bills right now, Uyghur Genocide Accountability and Sanctions Act, and as well as Uyghur Policy Act and the Transnational Repression Policy Act, because what's happening to me and what China is doing outside of its borders, that is transnational repression, and that must stop. And also we have Uyghur Human Rights Protection Act, grants P2 refugee status for the Uyghurs seeking safety, because seems like there's not much we can do for the Uyghur people back in East Turkestan, but please, you can help for the Uyghur refugees living in the United States. So those are the few things that you can do your engagement, whether through advocacy, storytelling, or consumer choice, or donation, or legislative support, can help bring justice and the freedom closer for the Uyghur people, and also for the freedom and democracy of the world, and your own children and the grandchildren's their destiny, their future. Because if we don't stop the CCP right now, hold them accountable, then it will be our children and grandchildren who will pay the consequences of an illiberal world.
It won't stop there. It'll continue, and they'll just be the next group. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate, and we'll put all those ways in which to contribute and to participate in the show notes. You know, Rushan, I appreciate you taking the time and sharing with me. It means a lot. And I hope to have you on again. Maybe we talk a little bit about the book, or and I know you're an expert in how technology can be leveraged for oppression. So I would love to get into that a little bit. Because it's an interesting topic, and it's something that's implemented all over the planet, or being implemented. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to maybe next session. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
It means a lot. Thanks so much.
Thank you.